Got some oil leaks and some parts that are pretty much wore out, but that's where Rock Auto comes into play. What we're going to do is get a list together, and we'll jump online and get those parts ordered to take care of all the issues on this engine.
Now that we've cleaned up 20 years of dirt and grime on our engine, we'll give it new life with some fresh components. All right, the first thing we're doing here is just replacing this little oil restrictor that goes in the back of the block. These are super important because if this O-ring fails or if you just forget to put one in, then you won't have any oil pressure at all, and it's always a good idea with these junkyard engines to go ahead and replace this. We'll get the old one out and then put this new one in. Important thing here, just make sure you put some oil on the O-ring before you put the new one back in. There we go. Up next here is this cam retainer plate. In the block there's these two oil passages right here, and this O-ring helps contain all that oil, so it's another one of these parts where it's cheap to replace and easy enough if you're down this far, so it's cheap insurance. All right, timing chain on, just make sure the timing marks are lined up. This might take a few tries depending on how many times you've done it. Also be sure to add some thread locker to make sure these bolts don't come out. We'll torque these to 26 pound-feet. When installing the oil pump, it's a good idea to go ahead and lubricate the internal parts for initial startup. All right, so now we'll move on to the bottom, get the oil pan and pickup tube in here, and that'll be it. Flip back over and throw the rest on the top. We do have a new O-ring, that's a must. You just gotta be real careful here when you're putting this in. If the O-ring gets pinched, then it won't seal, so you just wanna take your time, kind of watch it, make sure good to go. It's not pinched or anything. That's it. So I'm actually going to leave these bolts loose for now because the rear cover and the timing cover, they have bolts that go through the oil pan into the covers, so it's just a little bit easier to get those aligned the way they need to, tighten those down, and then tighten this down last. So we've got our rear main cover and our timing cover here. It's a great idea to replace the seals. They're really cheap. Again, one of those parts, you might as well do it while you're here. To get these out, I find the best way is to just, it's easy to crack this stuff, so just take it slow. And then to get the new one in, just press it in. There we go. One thing to note with these seals, these ones in particular are Teflon, so when you go to install this cover on the engine, you do not need to oil it. With the timing cover, it's a little bit different because, as you can see, this seal doesn't ride on the crank itself. It actually rides on the crankshaft pulley. So we're going to put these bolts in a little bit loose. We'll actually install the pulley, timing cover, and then we'll tighten everything down at the end. Finally, we are on to the top end. All right, put some bolts on it. After looking at our old rocker arms and seeing how worn out they were, we opted to get a new set from Rock Auto. We got this engine pretty much buttoned up, and it looks so much better than it did when we got it out of the junkyard. Obviously, we cleaned everything, all the new Rock Auto parts, all that went on pretty smooth. So I can't wait to get this thing in the truck and see what it sounds like when it's fired up. There's still a lot of parts that we need to put on here before we get going, but it's almost easier to do those things once we get it in there. So looking pretty good.